Hello, I am Peter Lee for Newsbud's China Watch. This week on China Watch, goodbye Russiagate, hello Chinagate. There's a new kid in town. As of March 25th, 2019, the Committee on the Present Danger, China. It is the creature of cryptofascist strategist Steve Bannon, and it's a sign that Republicans, conservatives, populists, whatever you want to call them, expect to ride the China threat wave over the carcasses of the Democrats and into the White House for another 4 years of Donald Trump. Also in this episode, how an incurable disease is remaking the pig industry in China and around the world. And why does its path lead to a bioweapons laboratory on Russia's southern border? And April 11th is the anniversary of one of the most important inflection points in modern history, but one that is virtually unknown in the West. It was the date a conspiracy to start a war between the United States and China was stopped in its tracks. First, let's take a look at the Committee on the Present Danger, China, otherwise known by its initials as CPDC. It's also known as CPD4 since previous iterations attacked the Soviet Union twice and terrorism once. By a funny coincidence, every iteration of the Committee for the Present Danger shaped the debate in favor of confrontation, more military spending, and also the wholesale employment of CPD committee members into the presidential administration. Yes, China's right there in the name in capital letters to alert the general public that we shouldn't be worried about global warming, crumbling infrastructure, an out-of-control military, deepening social division, or the struggle between stagnating global liberalism and resurgent fascism. Now, we're supposed to worry about China, because China, unlike all those other problems, is what's going to pay to put the kids of arms merchants, pundits, and politicians through college, and quite possibly put Donald Trump back in the White House for a second term. Yes, the full Mueller report isn't out yet, but it looks like the Russiagate conspiracy frenzy that the Democrats stoked for 2 years is going to burn out without burning up Donald Trump. And the Republicans are ready to bring an even bigger fire to burn down the Democrats. The fire this time, China. As the chairman of the CPDC, Brian Kennedy, put it, "Media and half our political system have spent the last 2 years pursuing allegations of Russian collusion that turned out to be baseless. This is especially ridiculous when one considers the array of threats posed by the People's Republic of China." The CPDC roster is interesting. That's because it includes a clutch of right-wing dingbats looking for a profitable pivot from the anti-terrorist grift to the anti-China grift. People like Frank Gaffney and "My God is bigger than your God" anti-Islam warrior General Jerry Boykin. But it also includes longtime China regime change activists like Bob Fu and Yang Jianli. And it also is chock-a-block with right-wing anti-Chi-Com enthusiasts like ex-CIA Director James Woolsey, Mark Stoke, he's the executive director of the Ultrahawk Project 2049 think tank, and Captain James Finnell, the former Director of Intelligence and Information Operations U.S. Pacific Fleet, who served as the point man for the strategy to confront and isolate China in the Pacific. There's also a smattering of respectable China Hawk scholars like Arthur Waldron, and, well, Arthur Waldron. The only thing the CPDC doesn't have is Democrats. That's because the Committee on the Present Danger, China, is Steve Bannon's baby. Yes, Steve Bannon, the fascism-friendly strategist whose canny mix of anti-elite populism, racial dog whistling, and media manipulation put Donald Trump in the White House. It's long been clear, at least to viewers of China Watch, that Bannon intends to ride the China threat horse to restore his influence and respectability in Washington and also leadership in the political and electoral councils of Donald Trump. And hey, it's working! Orville Schell, something of a liberal gatekeeper for respectable China policy, told the New York Times. Many analysts would have totally rejected him 2 years ago. But people are more sympathetic now that engagement with China has been defrocked. On the China question, he's no longer the skunk at the party. Well, Orville Schell apparently found the stink intoxicating because he recently jumped on the China threat skunk wagon and provided the white shoe template for witch hunts in academe and the media entitled Chinese Influence in American Interests, Promoting Constructive Vigilance. So, liberal imperialism and populist fascism unite to confront a communist state. Who'd have thunk it? Well, the Democrats thunk it. The mantra for the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton-era holdovers is that the Democrats will always run to the right on foreign policy and not get outflanked by the Republicans, be it on the topics of terrorism, Israel, Russia, or China. China especially, because the Clintons were rather effectively tagged with the corrupted China appeaser tag during Bill Clinton's presidency, and Hillary Clinton vigorously ran in the opposite direction for 2 decades. But here's my prediction. When it comes to running a red-baiting campaign, the Republicans will eat the Democrats' lunch. The Republicans are going to go straight for the red meat and the blood and guts. Steve Bannon has already announced that the Committee on the Present Danger China will feature a frontal assault on, of all things, the financial industry for complicity in an engagement-driven China policy. At the CPDC's Washington launch, Bannon declared, all the McKinsey guys, all the Booz Allen guys, all of the law firms, all of the accounting firms, Goldman Sachs, my old firm, all of the commercial banks, all of them know about the Chinese government's policies towards Uyghurs and Christians and other religious minorities and the enslavement of the Chinese people. Steve Bannon accuses U.S. firms of selling out amid enslavement of the Chinese people. For Bannon's brand of populism, it doesn't hurt that there are a lot of people that don't like the financial industry and also think it's run by Jews. Answering the call, Ted Cruz made an appearance at the CBDC conference and channeled red baiter Joe McCarthy by calling out pro-China apologists in the U.S. government and media. The senator criticized pro-Beijing officials in government and the news media for perpetuating communist rule in China. The apologists for the Chinese communists we have in the media, that we have sadly in Congress, are not advancing the cause of peace, are not advancing the cause of human rights. They are not advancing the cause of truth by hiding the truth, he said. Newt Gingrich, who previously held the post of master GOP strategist, echoed Cruz. Very much as we had to get organized in the 30s to stop un-American activities, we're going to go through the same cycle here. Enjoy the cycle, Democrats, and expect it to be just like the 1950s when Republicans pounded Democrats as disloyal appeasers of the Soviet Union. All in all, I seriously doubt Democrats are going to be able to run right of Steve Bannon and Ted Cruz and Newt Gingrich to stay out in front on the China threat. As to where Trump and his re-election fit in, Bannon stated, no one to date has gotten to the right of Trump on China. And Steve Bannon intends to keep it that way. But there's one conspicuous name missing from the Committee on the Present Danger China roster. That's Miles Kwok. Miles Kwok, the Chinese billionaire kleptopatriot exiled from China, frequently featured on China Watch, and determined to bring down his numerous enemies in the CCP with the help of the United States, the U.S. media, and Steve Bannon. Kwok has apparently acquired a significant trove of embarrassing tittle-tattle about the corruption and misdeeds of top Chinese communist leaders. His dalliance with the New York Times stumbled, but he has entered into a full-blown partnership with Steve Bannon. How full-blown? How about Miles Kwok has promised to donate $1 billion more to the Rule of Law Fund. The Rule of Law Fund is Bannon's organization dedicated to the global victory of Judeo-Christian civilization. As for why it's $1 billion more, Kwok claims he has donated $100 million to the fund already. Miles Kwok's thinking has apparently evolved beyond his previously stated goal of simply destroying his detested enemy Wang Qishan, now the vice president of the PRC, who he characterized as a cancer on the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese nation. Now, Kwok wishes to destroy both Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party itself, which brings him more in line with Steve Bannon's philosophy. As to why he wants to gift Bannon with his millions, it's so Kwok has a domineering voice in the agenda of the Committee on the Present Danger China. Kwok apparently has some difficulty at the moment in reconciling his objectives with the current ambition of the Committee on the Present Danger China, which sees no problem in shattering China, and not just the Chinese Communist Party, to remove a troublesome challenger to American hegemony. A pro-Kwok media outlet described a recent meeting between Miles Kwok and Steve Bannon to massage this awkward contradiction. We solemnly and officially declare that we shall never cooperate with any organization or share intelligence with them if they act against China or the Chinese people. The aim of the CPD is to demolish the evil group of the CCP and bring the state traitors to justice. We are not going to do any harm to the ordinary Chinese people. Steve Bannon agreed with Miles that the common Chinese people are hardworking and kind-hearted people. Well, $100 million and the promise of $1 billion more would also convince me of the kind-heartedness of the Chinese people, at least some of them. Kwok is quite frank about his desire for leverage over the CPDC, and it looks like Miles's dream is to rebrand the Committee on the Present Danger China as the Committee on the Present Danger, the Chinese Communist Party. Miles Kwok said he is committed to donating another $1 billion to the Rule of Law Fund, adding that without sufficient financial support, the fund would not be strong enough in its cooperation with organizations like the Committee on the Present Danger to fight the Chinese Communist Party. Good luck with that. Does Miles Kwok really have $1 billion safely out of China? And can a single Chinese billionaire redirect the China threat juggernaut that is designed to return Donald Trump to the White House and shower hundreds of billions of dollars on the U.S. military-industrial think tank media complex for a generational war with China? Well, let's see if Miles Kwok is going to run Steve Bannon or the other way around. Either way, China war is going to be at the top of the agenda. Next up, swine fever. As the U.S. Beltway obsesses on its China threat calculations, the global pig industry and the global agricultural economy are being transformed by a lethal virus, African swine fever, or ASF. ASF is not transmittable to humans, but the current form of the virus is absolutely lethal to pigs and highly contagious, and it is sweeping through China. The Chinese pig-raising industry is being remade as the government has quarantined districts and banned shipments of pigs in order to contain the virus. Chinese pig production will drop up to 40% as pig farmers slaughter hogs they can't ship or sell. Since pig farming relied on imported soybean meal for feed, and feed imports are going to drop, China's ability to import massive amounts of American agricultural products, a key source of Chinese leverage in the trade war, is under threat. But on the other hand, China will be buying a lot more U.S. pork, though there's no way the U.S. can fill the PRC pork hole by itself. So there's that. The virus is extremely robust and can survive for extended periods outside of a live host and inside pork products. That's including the animal feed in which most pig blood shows up. The threat of swine fever from China to Taiwan's pork industry has become a political talking point for the anti-PRC Taiwanese government and media. Even the 2019 World Pork Expo in Des Moines, Iowa, in the United States, was canceled out of an abundance of caution, as the organizers put it. It looks like the Chinese pig industry, which has almost 700 million hogs and produces half the world's pork, will turn its back on the small mom-and-pop producer that formed the backbone of the industry in favor of massive industrial facilities that can invest the money in the procedures and equipment to manage the biohazard and also generate giant, reeking lagoons of pig excrement. 1 million tons of feces and an unbearable stench. Life near industrial pig farms. Well, that's what progress smells like in the pig industry. The Chinese government is pushing the narrative that it's got a handle on the epidemic, but according to a U.S. delegation that visited in March, that's not the case. African swine fever is very bad. There are reported cases all across the country, but many cases are not reported. They have found the disease in sausage and processed meat and in dumplings, although the government repeatedly tells consumers that it has nothing to do with health of the human. People are still concerned. Pork consumption is going down. African swine fever is uncontrollable. It has spread from China to Vietnam and will likely soon be in Thailand, South Korea, and Japan. The situation in China is much worse than 4 months ago. Why, you can't believe what China says about African swine fever. Well, where did this menace come from? The immediate answer is African swine flu came into China from the north, from Russia. Before Russia, it ravaged the Baltic states and Poland, leading to the restructuring of the pig industry up there. And before that, it came from the Caucasus. And the trail ends, or starts, in Georgia. Maybe the African swine fever we're all worried about was held in a government lab in Georgia and got out with a little help from the violently anti-Russian government of Mikhail Saakashvili. Back in 2012, when ASF was just a little regional blip that had been roiling the Caucasus for 5 years since 2007, the Russian Consumer Protection Agency blamed Georgia for releasing the virus. ASF came to us from Georgia, first, of course, to Ossetia, and then to the Krasnodar and Stavropol regions. There are signs that this situation is artificially injected. It is economic sabotage. Well, the Russians might know more than a little about African swine flu. The African swine fever that made its way from Georgia through Russia to the Baltics and Poland and now to China and Asia is genetically different from the previous outbreak, which was traced to exchanges between Portugal and its Angolan colony in the 1950s. The Georgian outbreak that occurred in 2007 is related to a version of the virus first identified in Southeast Africa in the 1970s. To be specific, Mozambique and Zambia, with Mozambique a major Soviet client at the time. Soviet agricultural experts worked extensively on aid projects in Mozambique. Maybe Soviet scientists collected some samples of the local swine fever variant with hopes of developing a vaccine, the as yet unattainable holy grail of ASF researchers to this day. But maybe the Soviet bureaucracy had a better idea, and the samples were transferred to the Soviet bioweapons program to be genetically modified for increased lethality and put into the arsenal. It's known that by the 1980s, the Soviet Union developed a second-generation ASF bioweapon in its so-called ecology program for agricultural warfare. And maybe some of that engineered African swine flu was held in Georgia, when Georgia was a piece of the Soviet Union and Georgia was part of the Soviet biological warfare system, producing anti-livestock biological weapons as well as veterinary vaccines at multiple facilities. And maybe some of that ended up in the labs of independent post-Soviet Georgia under the administration of pro-American, Russian-hating, dingbat entrepreneur Mikhail Saakashvili, and somehow found its way into the wild, well, onto the hog farms of Russia and its allies. So, is the catastrophe in Eurasian pig raising actually blowback from the Soviet biological weapons program courtesy of Mikhail Saakashvili? Could be. And consider this. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. military didn't help the government of newly independent Georgia destroy its stocks of dangerous pathogens. It helped preserve them through the establishment of Georgia's repository for dangerous pathogens, the bizarrely named Pathogen Asset Control System, which is now maintained at a U.S.-funded facility in Tbilisi, the Richard Lugar Center for Public Health Research. Think about that as you chew on your tofu pork chop. Finally, to paraphrase Franklin Roosevelt, April 11th, 1951, a date that will live in obscurity. That is, if the U.S. Navy has anything to say about it. April 11th, 1951 was the date Douglas MacArthur tried to widen the Korean War into China by sending a U.S. Navy destroyer, the John Bull, into harm's way off the Chinese coast to provoke a Chinese attack and trigger retaliation by a U.S. task force lurking over the horizon. It was also the date President Harry Truman pulled the plug on the mission, and Douglas MacArthur himself, by relieving MacArthur of all of his commands. Nowadays, China hawks would probably say Truman shafted MacArthur and betrayed the United States by throwing away America's best chance to strangle the red Chinese dragon in its cradle. Decide for yourself by buying or renting my documentary on Douglas MacArthur's secret conspiracy to start a war with China, which features first-person testimony by participants in the mission and never-before-seen documents. Look for the link in the show notes. That's all for this week. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting China Watch. We're 100% people-funded independent media for and by the people. See you next time. I am Peter Lee for Newsbud's China Watch.